Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. Drive to Survive came out this week and I watched all 10 episodes in a row, binge watched the entire new season so you don't have to. And I am here to break down every episode, not fully in depth, but we're going to hit the high notes and the many low notes. Because I know that Drive to Survive is a thorn in the side of some of the fans. Some fans love it. I personally enjoy it for the heightened drama that it is. Know that it is a documentary and I kind of refuse to see it as one. However, I do believe it serves a purpose. It is obviously part of the reason that F1 is so big at the moment. It's attracted so many new fans. And just at the top of the show, however you got into F1, I don't care. Just as long as you enjoy the sport. And I genuinely don't care how you found it, to be quite frank. Now, with that being said, Drive to Survive is obviously a documentary, but they are very picky about what does and doesn't make the show. They choose which storylines to go with. So there is quite a few big moments of the 2024 season that were missed. We will touch on them as we go through the episode. And as much as I probably will shit on the show, it is actually quite fun to see behind the scenes clips that we wouldn't get to see without Drive to Survive being there. I also just want to say at the top of the show, if you are an Aston Martin fan and you are hoping to see anything of your drivers through these 10 episodes, don't bother watching because there is severe Aston Martin erasure. It is like they do not exist apart from like one clip in one of the Brazil episodes. Genuinely, it's like Aston Martin just doesn't exist. This might as well have been a 9-team series because, as I said, severe Aston Martin erasure. But let's kick things off with episode 1, business as usual. And this entire episode focuses on the news that Lewis Hamilton is leaving Mercedes to go to Ferrari. It touches a little bit on Sainz and then makes a swift change to being a fairly Christian Horner focused episode, which I have to say, I cannot believe how much time that man was on my screen. Like through the whole, every single episode, Christian Horner was there. Even with episodes that had nothing to do with Red Bull and had nothing to do with him. He was there. He was there. Him and Zach Brown, the two of them, was sick fed up at the sight of them by the end of it. But I have to say, I quite liked this as an opening episode. I liked that it basically just kicks off with an absolute bang. That big moment, Lewis Hamilton's off to Ferrari. What I will say is that they do make it seem that Toto Wolff found out the day that they released the 2024 Challenger and we all got to see the car and the livery. That's not how it happened. The news did break separately to that event. That being said, it was cool to see the Toto and Lewis interactions and the little, sort of funny moments that they had on stage together where Toto was like, we put more red on the car so Lewis would feel at home and all that kind of stuff. It was quite fun. What was incredible editing and really caught me, and I was like, oh, user shady Netflix, was Lewis Hamilton, the end of that clip of Lewis sort of leaving that event. And I think it was Will Buxton saying, with Lewis going to Ferrari, who gets the chop? And it's switching to Carlos singing the final countdown. Y'all are shady, Netflix. I also quite liked the clip at the press conference where you can hear Lewis and Carlos asking if, talking about whether or not Carlos might go to Mercedes and has Toto been in contact. Carlos asking Lewis if he's leaving the team because he doesn't think Mercedes are going to be competitive. At this point, Mercedes has had quite a struggle. They weren't having the best few years, and Carlos thinks, are you leaving because you don't think Mercedes is going to get back to the top? And Lewis is like, no, this is something I want to go and do. And I was really enjoying this sort of Lewis and Carlos and Toto dynamic, and I wanted more of that, and then bang, Christian Horner allegations come out. It was dramatic, to say the least. They really hyped up the drama of an already very dramatic scenario. The point where they ask the principals, the team principals, about their thoughts and feelings and stuff, and just not a single one says anything. I was like, oh. And obviously with the Netflix dramatization of it all, it makes it so much higher. The editing that Netflix did with everyone sort of finding out the pings coming through the phones and all the sort of side-eye looks at one another, and the comms team from Red Bull sort of going and speaking to Horner and everything like that. It was Kardashian level, dramatization of something. It honestly, all I could think about was watching that episode where Kim Kardashian, a lot of you might not be Kardashian fans, but there was an episode where Kim Kardashian was literally doing a confessional and her phone goes and it's pictures of her sister's baby daddy cheating on her sister who was pregnant. Like, it was just huge levels of drama, and this gave me that. The episode does quite a bad job of sort of differentiating between pre-season testing, and it's like, there we are, and then it's just practice in Bahrain. It's like there was no time between the two of them, and it feels like it was all just one big weekend where this all happened in a oneer. But actually there was quite a bit of time between the allegations of Horner coming out and the beginning of the season. As I said, that episode pivoted very quickly from being Lewis's situation with Mercedes and Ferrari into just full-on Christian Horner. And I guess that's how it kind of went down. Like, we were all so caught up in the Lewis leaving Mercedes, and then it was just like, bang, Christian Horner. So I guess it's probably realistic to what life was. I actually forgot watching it just how scary that Red Bull looked at the beginning of last year. It just looked ominous. It looked like a beast, and we were all like, oh, the season's Red Bulls. Like, just let's fast forward to 2025. That's what we were all thinking, and it's quite fun to go back and watch that and think about what we were all feeling and talking about back at the beginning of the year. I also was hooked on the moment that all the team principals and the media got the anonymous Dropbox file or whatever it was, the cache that had all of the WhatsApp text messages between Horner and the Red Bull employee. It was that whole edit of everybody finding out, that again was like, it was almost like a political drama straight out of Washington, D.C. Like, it was so dramatic and really, really heightened. And I think the series does a really good job of tying whatever drama is happening off track to what happens on track. And there might be no correlation between it, but it did a really good job of showing Horner's situation and how that could be affecting Red Bull and that sort of team. And is it affecting it on track? Maybe not now, but it is, further down the line. Then at a last minute, that episode just switches right back to Carlos Sainz, and we get a very, very quick and probably not long enough part of Carlos not being able to race in Saudi Arabia and having his appendix out and then going to Australia. But it's like that. And the jumps are all a bit messy. It didn't really do it justice, just how big that was for Carlos. It was quite interesting to hear Sainz talking about how he was really nervous to go and race in Australia, but he absolutely had to do it because every race of his for that season was an audition because he was obviously out of a job. I do not agree with the Oliver Bearman erasure. We will come and talk about more of that a bit later, but there is absolutely no mention of the incredible work that Oliver Bearman did in Saudi Arabia, which pretty much earned him his race seat this year. As I said, Ollie has a part of an episode later on, so we'll come and talk about him then. And I have to say, one of my favourite additions to Drive to Survive as a talking head in the confessionals is Carlos Sainz's cousin and manager, Carlos. He is very funny, and I enjoyed hearing from him. So I have to say, episode 1, it was a decent open to the season. It came straight out the gates with drama through and through the episode, and I have to say I quite enjoyed episode 1. All right, moving on to episode 2, Frenemies, and this whole episode is about Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, and this is where my issues about Drive to Survive really started to kick in. One thing I did love about this and quite a few of the other episodes throughout this season where we focus on drivers is the flashbacks to their karting days and seeing them as young kids competing in karting to now being one of the 20 Formula One drivers. It was very good. We got it in Charles Leclerc's episode. We got clips of Carlos Sainz, I think, as well at one point. Like, I did really enjoy it. We also got Jensen Button doing talking head commentary, which is a much better upgrade on Danica Patrick from last year. However, I completely disagree with the edit they did on Max and Lando.
Critical difference between Max and Lando. Max has a complete fuck you mentality.
Hey, don't give me that bullshit now. You guys give me the fucking strategy, okay?
And that's not Lando.
It's so bad. The edit is so bad. Like, what are you trying to tell me? That Max is aggressive and Lando likes pets? Like, what is this? That's what you're telling me I should feel from this? See, this is where I get pissed off at this, at Netflix and Drive to Survive, because basically you're telling me that I should be angry at Max and not like Max because of how he is on track, but oh, I'm fine with Lando because he likes dogs. It's complete bullshit. What pissed me off is that they didn't just use the same type of clips. They could have taken clips of Lando on track that year where he was slightly aggressive, where he was fighting Max or something like that. They should have used those clips. Or if they wanted to show them off track, they could have shown how great Max is with Penelope. They could have shown him with his cats. Like, use the same type of clip. It really pissed me off. It really pissed me off how it was Max is aggressive and here's a clip from him in Hungary, but Lando's lovable and adorable, here's him with some dogs. I will say that this episode, the way they frame Norris's win is all about Norris's own personal growth, and there is zero mention that McLaren brought a huge upgrade to the car for that race. Leading up to this moment, it's all about Norris not sort of like feeling confident in himself, and then it's like Miami hits and he's unlocked his true potential as a Formula One driver. And the way they edit is that Max Verstappen was breathing down Lando's neck the entire time, when actually Lando won with a very comfortable margin. He wasn't really under the immense pressure from Verstappen like Drive to Survive leads us to believe. Netflix just can't help themselves because they show Lando winning in Miami and they have all the sort of radio messages of Leclerc and Piastri sort of coming over the radio to say, you know, well done Lando, congratulations, all that kind of stuff. And then they cut to Max and it's Max being silent and saying and being like, well, you can't win them all. Again, it's just shady editing. Netflix seem to be playing into the same thing that a lot of media play into, which is Max is the bad guy, but Lando's the good guy, and we should all like Lando, and we should all not like Max. It's complete and utter bullshit. And that part of the episode was just like that Lando winning just completely pissed off Max and ruined his day, ruined his life. Like the way they used the commentary from the talking heads, the clips of, it's literally Max like taking his helmet, putting his helmet and stuff to the side, but he doesn't look happy. I mean, he's just obviously done a race as well. He's probably exhausted, but he didn't look happy, so he's not happy for Lando. And then it's obviously all the talk about their friendship and how this is going to ruin their friendship and their best friends. Not once have these two boys ever said they're best friends. They have literally said time and time again, both Max and Lando, that this hasn't changed their friendship, this battle. That yes, they can be feisty and stuff on track and they might say certain things, but then off track, they're still friends. But we just have to hammer home this dynamic that, Lando's suddenly going to be coming for Max's crown and it's all just going to break their relationship apart. I know I shouldn't get myself so worked up about it because it is just drama, but it really annoyed me. And then obviously I'm so pissed off by what I've just watched, and then they go and have the audacity to show me Zach Brown's toes. I don't need to see that man's toes. I didn't need to see Donald Trump. I didn't need to see Donald Trump at all. They then went to swiftly straight into Imola, and I think the edit they did on Imola just didn't really show how hard Lando hustled that car to try and chase Max at the end to try and get that win. I feel like it didn't really do it justice. And then we go to Austria. I don't know how I feel about the Austria edit. I mean, we all watched it. Netflix definitely did its Netflix spin and made it more dramatic. I feel like they did an all right job with I felt like when I was watching the sort of Lando consistently dive bombing Max into turn 3, I felt the same as when I watched the race in real time. What I then didn't enjoy was they hyped up to such a point and then it was instantly Lando talking about how he's going to lose all respect for Max if Max doesn't apologise for their collision. And I remember going back to that time and the media really hyping that up and both the boys then coming out and being like, we're actually fine. Do you know what I mean? We're actually fine. And I get it's the Netflix spin and the Netflix edit of stuff, but Netflix like to make a very big deal about Max's reputation. And as I said, how Max is this bad, aggressive guy who, you know, doesn't give a fuck about anyone. And Lando is this sweet little lamb that we all need to feel sorry for because he's been screwed over by his friend because his friend doesn't want him to win. I just really didn't enjoy that episode and the editing of it. I just thought it was disrespectful, actually, to both drivers, to be quite honest. I don't think it showed them as their true selves. And I left episode 2 feeling a little bit icky about the whole thing. And the whole thing being Drive to Survive, not Max and Lando. All right, moving on to episode 3, and it is looking out for number 1. This whole episode is George and Mercedes, and this is where it pisses me off that they try and call themselves a documentary. So obviously, we have a whole thing of Susie and Toto Wolff talking about Lewis's departure and who would they go to next, and Toto sort of floats some ideas, and I enjoyed when he said, you know, Fernando Alonso, and Susie's like, no, like, you're looking for a driver to do another era at Mercedes, and Fernando is not going to be the one to go and do a long era at your team. Don't consider him, which I kind of enjoyed. And, you know, Max gets floated, and then we get a whole bit of Toto sort of chasing Max and really wanting Max. And I did find the whole bit where Toto says, oh, when Lewis was at the team, I said, you know, out of respect to Lewis, I would never have gone to try and get Max on board. But now Lewis is leaving, why not? We then got the whole bit of Toto maybe floating the idea that he wanted Max and all that kind of stuff. Then it switches to George. And my feelings on it are twofold. And the way the story progresses and what I got from it was Toto was having these thoughts in his head saying, is George going to be the new leader for our team? Should I give him that opportunity and chance for next year, as in 2025? And George just needs to perform and we'll give him that opportunity and all this kind of stuff. They make a thing of it that Britain was this big decider and George didn't perform and Toto was pissed off at George for not performing. And then it hits to Spa, and I have to say that transition of George being underwater and coming to the top and he being in the car, very dramatic. I did enjoy that. And then we get the whole bit of George going along, winning that race, and it made it seem that Toto then was like, I'm going to sign George for next year, and took George aside and congratulated him and well done, and you're going to be my team leader next year. One, George already had a contract for 2025. The contract that George signed in 2023 had him at that team until the end of 2025. Spa was not this big decider that Toto Wolff was going to keep George on. He was already being kept at the team. The conversation was not, is George replacing Lewis? It is, who are you getting to replace Lewis, because George is already there. It just baffled me that that was the way they were going with this story. Also, not one mention that George was disqualified. They made it seem like this was some big, huge celebration for George. Well done, which it was, and we were all loving it. But he was disqualified an hour later, and not one mention of it. Not one mention that George was disqualified from that race. If they wanted to pick a race where George did a phenomenal job, use Vegas. Use Vegas. He did an incredible drive. He didn't get disqualified. But here we have his, which it was, don't get me wrong, he did an incredible job in Spa, but he literally finished the race with an illegal car that was severely underweight, and he got disqualified. But no, Netflix, we don't see it. We don't see it. There is so much focus put on George's Spa win, not telling the full story, but again, no mention of his win in Austria or his win in Vegas. It just annoys me that nothing was made that George was disqualified, that Lewis actually then won that race, and that we got like 2 seconds of Lewis winning in Silverstone, which is a far bigger story than most of what George did last year. The fact that in his final year with Mercedes, he went and won his home race, the emotion that was around that win, and we barely seen it. We barely seen it. And we talked about that. We still talk about that moment, and nada. Absolutely wild to me. It's absolutely wild to me. Justice for Hamilton's win in Silverstone, because that erasure I will not stand for. I also then really enjoyed the clips of Kimi Antonelli and him meeting Toto to do some driving out on track in a Mercedes car. I don't know what type of car it was. And, you know, I just found the whole thing really funny with Toto being like, how was school? And it's almost like he's his dad. And then patching calls from the FIA president because he's just so obsessed with watching Kimi on track. And then we get a clip where it's like literally on FaceTime, Toto tells Kimi that he's going to be a driver. And Kimi has this whole thing. And it's just how you know that it's so fake, because you're telling me Kimi Antonelli had no idea he was going to be a Mercedes driver before a whole load of Netflix cameras showed up at his house. Oh, it was such a frustrating episode to watch, and I again, didn't really enjoy that episode. All right, moving on to episode 4, Carlos Sainz. And this whole episode is about Carlos weighing up his options about whether he goes to Williams or Sauber or Alpine. And I actually really enjoyed this episode. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. One, because I love James Vowles. I love that man so much. He is funny. He is smart. The way he talks, he could honestly convince me to do anything, that man. I loved his intro into the episode. I loved hearing Claire Williams as a sort of talking head in her confessional talking about, you know, the team that her father built, that she was then team principal of, that now she's watching James Vowles take over, and how it's so different, and how, you know, it was just such a great moment to hear. What I did find very interesting is how early on there was conversations that James was considering dropping Logan. We obviously got the montage of crashes, and we got Vowles talking about how many parts on the cars they were having to replace, and how he was seriously considering dropping Logan. And it was like, it made it seem as if it was like 2 races into the season. Obviously, I don't know when exactly James Vowles started having those thoughts into the 2024 season, but it was interesting to see that it might have been a lot earlier than we all presumed. I will say I did find it a bit odd that we got no mention of Alex's crash in Australia, and Logan couldn't then race because Alex crashed his car. It did make it seem that Alex had had this perfect season and that everything was Logan Sargent's fault. And to be fair, 90% of the crashes were Logan in their time together, but maybe not telling the whole truth there, Netflix. But then again, they've not told the whole truth throughout most of the episodes, so here we are. Obviously, we're talking about Carlos and where he might go, and then we have this like law TV sort of montage of the team representative for Sauber, who used to be a lawyer, and now this is what he does, and he's very, you know, lawyer-esque in the way he conducts his business, and it's all about him wanting Carlos to sign for the team, and Audi want him, and all that kind of stuff. And I found it was so funny that Will Buxton just like couldn't even remember the full name of that team. We obviously get a whole bit with the talk of Sauber becoming Audi and all that kind of stuff. We get this badass clip of Carlos Sainz Sr., who is associated with Audi, and he's a Dakar rally driver, and it's him like over the sand dunes. It's so badass. I mean, Carlos Sainz Sr. is a literal badass. He's so fucking cool. We then move on to Carlos sort of saying he's not sort of weighed up his options and he doesn't know where he wants to go. And there was a moment, you'd cast your minds back to last year, where we were all just like, can he just put some pen to goddamn paper? Like, we've had enough of waiting. Can we just get him to just sign a bit of goddamn paper? Like, we need to know where he's going, because then the rest of the dominoes will fall. And it was interesting that that was all of the drivers. We also had Bottas in the press conference saying, I don't know when I'm going to be driving next year, because we're all just waiting on Carlos signing, because none of the teams are willing to offer us anything until they know where Carlos goes. You then have them asking, the Drive to Survive producers asking each of the drivers in their confessionals, or some of the drivers in their confessionals, like, where are you going to drive? And they'll say, I don't know, ask Carlos. So obviously it was just such a big moment, and they really sort of conveyed that by the fact you have Lando and Zach talking about it. I enjoyed the sort of Horner doing the wedding vows between Carlos and Williams, hosted by James Vowles. I thought that was very funny. And then it sort of gets to a point where you believe that he is going to sign for Williams, and honestly, I can't, because they just did such... Like, I remember watching this last year, and just, you could see how much James Vowles was just pining after Carlos signed. And they do a really good job of just portraying how much James really wanted Carlos signs. And it's him saying things like, I wake up in the morning and I go to sleep thinking of nothing else but Carlos. You know, signing a driver is much like dating someone. You start with a text, you go for dinner, and it does end up in a hotel room. And he's like, you want a relationship, I want a relationship. It was honestly comedy gold. I was pissing myself through the whole thing. And then you get to a point where it's like, oh, he's going to sign him, he's going to sign him. And it's like this mad, romantic, maybe like a rom-com style. They've got, you know, the Williams team sort of preparing champagne. They're in this hotel room and they're preparing champagne, and they've got the towel over the bucket and the glasses, and the contracts are all there, and Vowles is so excited. And honestly, it's like a gay rom-com. And then Carlos just stands him up. And I just couldn't believe that we were watching James Vowles get stood up in a hotel room with a bottle of champagne by Carlos Sainz. My God, it was good for the soul. And then enters Flavio Briatore. I loved the introduction of Flavio. He was edited like a mob boss, which, to be fair, Flav does give off that mob boss vibe. It was comedy gold. I was loving it. I also found it really interesting that you could hear some of the other sort of team principals' perspectives on the Carlos Sainz situation. And it was Horner saying, you know, Carlos hasn't made up his mind. Flavio won't hang around if Carlos is going to mess him around. Flav won't like that, and Flav won't like how expensive he is. So I did enjoy that. The whole bit of Carlos choosing Williams, and him sort of, you see him walking and knocking on a door, and you have clips of James Vowles and Flavio Briatore and the team representative from Cyber, whoever that lawyer guy was, all just waiting to see. And then and the door opens and it's James Vowles, and you're like, it was like watching a dating show. It was like one of them shitty Netflix station shows like The Circle or something like that. I don't know, I don't watch them, but it felt something like that. But I have to say, it was one of the most ridiculous Drive to Survive episodes I've ever watched, and I enjoyed every second of it. All right, moving on to episode 5, Le Curse of Leclerc. And this whole episode is dedicated to Leclerc winning in Monaco. I have to say, I think they did an all right job. I don't think they captured the emotion of it well. I do think that Charles's YouTube video shot by Anton did a much better job of portraying the raw emotion behind it. But they did an all right job. I think they did it well, I have to say. I think Netflix did it well. I loved the sort of silliness of the opening scene of him sort of going to the shop and not having 11 euros on his bank card. And it is just that type of stuff that was happening to Charles Leclerc. And then all the bits of, is there a curse on Leclerc in Monaco? And some of the drivers saying yes, some are saying no. Alex saying he'll take him to a Thai temple to get a blessing done on him. I loved all of it. I do think this is the most real Leclerc has been on Drive to Survive. We've heard him talk about his father before. We've heard him talk about Jules Bianchi before and the whole sort of feeling he has in Monaco. I think what made it a little bit rawer this time is that he actually went and won it, and you could tell how much it meant to him, and it was just it did feel the most honest and raw he's been about the whole situation. I loved the editing of the quali shots. I think they really managed to portray just how important qualifying is and how close, like on a knife edge, the drivers are driving through Monaco at that speed, and how close the walls feel, and they did a fantastic job. I loved watching that quali montage. I just loved the sort of editing of this episode. As I said, I loved the quali montage. I loved the shots of the sort of juxtaposition of the crowds out in the street roaring for Charles on race day, and him being at home with Alex and with Leo playing the piano, and the sort of quietness of him playing the piano, but you can hear it almost in the background, and then the roaring shots of the crowd. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I think the episode did a brilliant job at building the tension and keeping the tension there and keeping the drama there for what was overall a fairly boring race after lap 1. From lap 2 onwards, it was dull as dishwater, let's be honest, because it was just a complete procession. But I do think Netflix managed to they did what Netflix do, and this is the one time I think it does pay off, of creating such hype and drama and tension around something and keeping it there for what was mostly quite a dull race. But no, I did really enjoy it. I did enjoy that episode, but I do think that in terms of the raw emotion of that win, I do think the episode on Charles's YouTube channel was far better at portraying that. That being said, I do think it is one of the best Drive to Survive episodes out of all 7 seasons. In all seriousness, I do think it is so good. They did actually hit the nail on the head with this one. All right, episode 6, Wheels of Fortune. Now, this is personal preference, but I'd be quite happy to not see Zach Brown on my screen ever again. I'd actually be quite happy to not see Zach Brown, to not see Christian Horner, because every episode, just all the time, it's just Zach and Christian. And I understand it was a big part of the 2024 season was the battle for the constructors between these two teams, but I just don't care to see them on my TV all the goddamn time. Like, this whole season just became more and more about the team principles than it was about any of the drivers or any of the action on track. I don't care. Ugh. Anyway, God bless Will Buxton and Claire Williams, because they really just came into this episode to shit all over McLaren and their choice on strategies and the way the team handled things. And I enjoyed that because they deserved it. The whole episode focuses on the dynamic between Oscar and Lando, and I think the episode does, it's sort of on a knife edge, because I watched some of the clips and I thought, why are you putting what is happening on track to Lando and Oscar? Why are you putting the blame on them? But they managed to sort of slice through that with the confessionals of Will Buxton and Claire Williams to really remind the audience that actually this whole thing, all of this drama, has been created by none other than McLaren and Zach Brown. And I appreciated that. A big portion of this episode is Hungary, and I don't thank Netflix for making me relive the complete shit show that was McLaren at Hungary, and them giving Lando the opportunity to undercut and then forcing Lando to let Oscar back through because they fucked up, and the emotional blackmail they were giving Lando. I hated, we've already discussed it at length, I don't want to really get into it again. I thought the shadiness of Netflix sticking in that, once again, the shadiness of Netflix sticking in that clip of Christian Horner saying, well, I bet Max Verstappen wouldn't have swapped. Said it before and I say it again, Netflix, you are shady. I was interested to hear the team principal side of things when Netflix sort of asked, James Vowles and Toto Wolff if McLaren should be favouring Lando, and they both said, well, yes, he's the one that's in a title fight right now with Max Verstappen. And then them cutting to Christian Horner and saying, out of Lando and Oscar, who would you want to drive for you? And like that, Horner's like, Oscar. We swiftly move on to Monza in this episode, and we obviously get the absolute dramatics of Oscar's move on Lando on the first lap. And I have to say, that move was bloody brilliant. It was so good. It was bold, it was daring, and I loved it. And we obviously get Lando's reaction where they kind of make it seem like Oscar's the bad boy, and Lando didn't deserve that, and Oscar, you really upset Lando. And they really just sort of hold in that moment of Lando being upset, Oscar did a bad thing. And when they cut to Leclerc winning and you see the Tifosi screaming and everybody's happy, and then it switches to Zak Brown being like, we fucked this up. And there's a shot of Zak looking really angry, and then it cuts to Oscar like walking up the stairs, and it's like Zak Brown is pissed off at Oscar. But then we have this shady editing by Netflix, which is Lando's the one that's been hard done by, and Oscar did a bad thing, and Daddy Zak's pissed off. And it's like, no, Daddy Zak should be pissed off at himself because it was his own bloody fault. Oscar didn't do anything wrong. He did what any racing driver would do, and there we have it. What really annoyed me about this whole thing, and the reason that I say Daddy Zak, is there's also a clip where Zak couldn't be in, where was it? Baku? I think it might have been Baku. And they had to sit Lando and Oscar down with Andrea and I'm guessing like comms guys maybe from McLaren, and them talking about how there is team orders and we're going to favour Lando now and you guys are not allowed to do this again and, you know, naughty boys. I absolutely hated how the show infantilized them. It made them seem like they were naughty kids, like naughty school kids that were getting a row from the headmaster. It was just bizarre that they played it for these grown men being children, and I just really didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy, and they do it quite a few times and they do it this episode with Oscar and Lando, but they do it quite a few times with Lando, where they really infantilize him. They did it at the beginning of that Max and Lando episode where Max is this aggressive man and Lando just likes puppies. And then they do it again this episode where they show Lando sulking and like we're all supposed to feel like Lando's been hard done by and oh Lando and Oscar's the bad man. And it really, really grinds my gears. They do it again in a later episode. With Oliver Behrman, they really infantilize him as well. It just really grinds my gears. I hate it. Hate it. What I'm glad they did is how they ended the episode with Oscar's win in Baku, because if they'd sort of ignored that and just really hyped on the Hungary situation and then Monza, I'd have been a bit pissed off. So I'm glad they did show Hungary. I will say that this episode has really just affirmed I'm not a Zak Brown fan. I'm not a Zak Brown fan. I don't care about him going and playing golf in Florida with all his buddies. Like, it adds nothing, or his OAP baseball game. It does nothing for me. I don't care about it. What I care about is the drivers and what's going on there. I don't care about Zak Brown and his Wheels of Fortune. I think it's safe to say I'm not a Zak Brown fan, and I know some people are, just not for me. All right, episode 7, In the Heat of the Night. This episode I actually really enjoyed for the most part. The ending really pissed me off. We'll come on to that slightly in a second. I loved the format of this episode where they give 5 drivers a camera and we get this sort of vlogging footage following these 5 boys through one race weekend. I loved it. I loved the choice of drivers. They obviously chose Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc, George Russell and Pierre Gasly. And I just think it was a really interesting group of people to pick and I really enjoyed it. I loved seeing the behind the scenes stuff. I don't know how anytime you give Lando a camera, they've all literally got the exact same phone, but Lando looks like his is taken on a Nokia or like a potato. As I said, I really enjoyed this sort of BTS and the sort of following these drivers through one race weekend. I thought it was brilliant and I loved watching it. for the most part. As I said, we'll come on to it. I do think it does a really good job at showing just how grueling Singapore is in terms of the humidity and everything like that. Loved that. That whole clip after qualifying of Pierre and Charles going out for dinner and Pierre being late and Charles phoning him, that whole edit really just gave off like gay Euro Fast and Furious vibes. Like, I just couldn't get over how it was edited, and the neon lighting on Pierre's face in the car as he's smiling down the phone speaking to Charles Leclerc. It honestly, it was like they were gay European lovers in some Fast and Furious type film. And I'm not going to lie, I was so here for it. I loved it. We obviously then get a lot of talk about Singapore and how it's so demanding on the drivers. And, you know, we talk about how it's really difficult to get things right in Singapore and the humidity and everything like that. And they do a great job of showing how demanding it is on the guys in the race with Lando's near crash into the wall. And we can hear George over the radio saying how he's really struggling to like see because he's so dehydrated, he's losing so much water, he's dizzy and everything, but he's trying to keep this car on track because he's defending against Charles Leclerc. All that kind of stuff really hyped up just how demanding and grueling it is. I absolutely hated watching the aftermath of George Russell. There was a clip where George is walking back to his garage or whatever it is, and you can see that he is a completely broken person. We've seen the other 4 drivers and they look exhausted and everything, but George just on another level, out of it, completely gone. And I honestly believe at that point it should have literally switched straight to just George as a confessional talking head talking about his experience. We then got George in the ice bath with Carmen and you can see him just completely breaking down. Carmen closes the door. Another very appropriate point for Netflix to put the goddamn cameras down. What we then get is Netflix filming the door, the closed door, and you can hear the audio of Carmen and George having a complete panic attack. It is an invasion of privacy. It should never have been filmed, and I hated every second of it. Hated every second of it. It should never have been aired. Should never have gone out. It was so disrespectful to George, who was having a complete panic attack because he's lost so much body weight, he's lost so much fluid, he's dizzy, he's lightheaded, he feels sick. And you're going to air that? Nope, didn't enjoy it. We then literally switched to a clip of them getting in an elevator and George sort of talking. Completely appropriate to have seen that bit of George going in and him talking about it and a confessional. We didn't need to see George in that state. And I actually felt incredibly sorry for him. And it really pissed me off watching that Netflix. I hope you know that. Apart from that, I did really enjoy the vlog style content from that episode. And I really do hope we get more of that. Moving on to episode 8, Elbows Out. And this is a very Red Bull heavy episode. And again, another very heavy focus for a team that gets a lot of attention. The episode opens and it is all about Checo and he's not performing and we're all getting pissed off and should we drop him, shouldn't he, and Christian Horner's going to have a lot of questions to answer because Checo's performance is terrible and blah 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 blah. And at the end of the episode we have no idea if Checo was dropped or not. We don't touch on it. What we do touch on and what the episode swiftly changes to being about is Daniel. Well, actually, sorry, let me take that back. We do almost know that Checo's dropped. It's not explicitly told to us. I'll come on to it in a second, but the basic of this episode is Daniel Ricciardo's out. It is made very clear to us that Liam Lawson is pissed that Daniel Ricciardo got the 2024 race seat. We hear him literally talking about how annoyed and frustrated he is. And he has moments with Peter Bayer, the CEO of Racing Bulls, where he's like, I need to drive, I'm losing my mind. And I get that, but I have to say he comes across really bad in this episode, Liam Lawson. It is a very interesting moment. It's a lot of talk about, is Daniel the right one to potentially replace Checo? And Daniel's not having a great time. And there was a very interesting clip of Peter Bayer speaking with Helmut Marko and Peter Bear saying, well, Daniel just needs to find his confidence in the car. He needs to, he just can't get it with that car, and he can't get it to be fast, and he just needs to find his confidence again. And Helmut Marko saying the Netflix story is not working. And that Netflix story is Daniel Ricciardo, Red Bull driver, leaves Red Bull, makes a huge jump and goes to Renault where he thinks he can, really progress and become a world champion. Things don't work out. He goes to McLaren looking for the same thing. Things don't work out. He leaves the sport. He's back in Red Bull as a third reserve driver. Gets his opportunity. He's in V-Carb. The whole 2023 break the hand, whatever. He's back in for 2024 and he's gunning for the Red Bull seat. However, it obviously doesn't work like that because Daniel's performance is just nowhere. But it was interesting, that clip of Helmut Marko saying it can't be Daniel. That Netflix story is not there. And what I want to know is if they actually knew they were being filmed or not, because they made it seem as if they weren't. As I said, Liam Lawson doesn't come across particularly well in this episode. However, I don't think anyone in Red Bull or V-Carb particularly does. I don't think the teams or the seniors of those teams come across particularly well in this episode at all. We get a whole bit where they want to test Lawson in a Red Bull car against Max Verstappen, and it's almost played like Liam doesn't know Max is going to be there, and Liam's nervous because he's got 3 laps and these 3 laps will decide his future. And then we have Horner tell Liam, Max is actually just coming in, and it's Liam's whole demeanor changes and it's almost like he's scared of Max, and Max just rocks up, happy go Larry, jumps in the car, does his laps, gets out, leaves, probably flies back to Monaco. Liam has to get in the car and go and do his laps, and it's worked out, he's only like 2/10 or whatever away from Max, and Christian's like, just be ready for when the call comes. You have this moment where it's like, is it going to be Liam? Is it going to be Daniel? We don't know, and it's just all played for heightened, and who's it going to be? Who's it going to be? And we obviously all know who it is, but there's this interesting moment as well where we also hear Daniel saying that he was told that the summer break there could be movement for him to Red Bull. Their timing of everything is just wild because it's summer break and then it's Liam's doing his test and then it's suddenly Daniel's dropped, but that wasn't until Singapore. And then suddenly Liam Lawson's in the V-Carb, him and Checo have a big dust up in Mexico, and it then swiftly switches to what I thought was going to be Liam Lawson coming to say I'm sorry and grovel because Christian Horner's pissed off that 2 of his drivers are fighting. But actually what it is we see clips of Checo and Horner speaking and then Checo leaving and then Liam getting the Red Bull job. Their timeline is so wild, and I know it's all done for to make it exciting and oh my god, it's all happening at once. And I know that there would have been a bit of time between Checo and Horner having the discussion and Liam then getting the job because they do all the photo shoots and everything like that, and then there's probably been a good few weeks for it's announced, but I just don't believe it happened right after Mexico. Or maybe it did and they just didn't want to say anything. I don't know, but we also get another montage of Daniel leaving Formula One, and it just didn't feel the same, to be honest. I didn't feel emotional about it, and I know I maybe should have done because this is actually his time he's going, but we've already done this. We've done this whole Daniel's leaving, and let's do a montage of some of his clips of his time on Drive to Survive during F1 and blah, 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 blah. I just didn't hit the same and I didn't really care. So there's that. As I said, I came out of that episode not feeling great about Horner or Red Bull, and I really didn't do Liam Lawson any favours, I have to say. Episode 9, Under New Management. And this episode is a lot about the fight for P6 in the Constructors' Championship. And what I will say is we obviously get a lot of talk about Haas and Günther leaving and Ayo Komatsu taking on, and we get a little short bit at the top of the episode of Günther talking about getting fired. And then thankfully we don't see him for the rest. I love Günther, but I'm over that now. It's a new era for Haas, and what was really refreshing to see was Haas having a Drive to Survive episode that didn't follow the same formula as it has done for the past 6 seasons, which is, we're at the back of the pack and we're really struggling, and come on, let's all just fight and fight and fight, and then we go out and we have a shit performance, and then it's, I better get on the phone to Gene Haas, and I know, a couple of swear words, fucking this, fucking that, and then episode's done, and that's it till the next one. I was so over it, and I'm so glad that we get something different for Haas, and it is. They are feeling more positive about this season and how they go on, and they actually have a quite a good performance. Really enjoyed the editing of the Gasly and Esteban Ocon fighting and all of their sort of moments throughout the year played to comedy opera music. Really enjoyed that. I find this episode to be bizarre because it's about the battle between Haas and Alpine for the battle for 6th in the constructors, but it bizarrely revolves around the dropping of Esteban Ocon, and it's framed very oddly in that the show basically tries to tell us that Esteban isn't motivated anymore, and Flavio Briatore, as I said, calling him a spoiled brat and all this kind of stuff. And then like, oh, suddenly second in Sao Paulo. It was almost as if the show had decided that the storyline was going to be Esteban's an unmotivated driver, and then they had to quickly pivot because he went and did a phenomenal job in Sao Paulo. And they had to awkwardly sort of push aside the inconvenient fact that Ocon had delivered the team's best result of the season. But the most interesting bit about this is we get a clip of the Haas team with Ayo Komatsu talking to all the people at the factory about how Esteban is going to be coming on board as their driver for 2025. And one of the mechanics or somebody in the team takes the mic and says, "Are you sure Esteban is the right choice?" And it really sort of came across that the team is nervous that Esteban Ocon is joining them for 2025. Do get a tiny bit of Oliver Bearman in this episode. It is that Kevin Magnussen is too ill to race in Brazil, so Oliver Bearman's going to come in and race for him. It was very tough watching Ollie and hearing his radio messages in Brazil. He was terrified for his life. I fucking hated the scene after the race where Ollie goes and speaks to Ayo, and Ayo says, "You weren't good enough. We told you to keep it on the track, and you just couldn't do it, and it's just not good enough, and you need to be better," and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, excuse me? It's the man's 3rd time racing in Formula One. The drivers up and down that grid were struggling to keep it on track. Carlos Sainz couldn't keep it on the track, crashed. Nico Hulkenberg couldn't keep it on the track, crashed. Fernando Alonso, like all of these people were struggling to keep it on the track, and you're going to say Oliver Bearman, who in his 3rd race got called up at the last minute, wasn't good enough? Oh, I saw red. I was furious. I hated it. And I was just watching Ollie, and he looked so defeated, and I was like, Shayla, no, don't be mean to Ollie. You go out there and fucking race the car. It really pissed me off. And the fact that that is all we see of Oliver Bearman throughout the whole 10 episodes, we get nothing about him doing a fantastic job in Baku. We get nothing about the incredible job he did in Saudi Arabia when he had to replace Carlos Sainz. I will not stand for this Oliver Bearman erasure. Episode 10, Endgame. And this whole episode was about the finale of the Drivers and Constructors Championship. Really enjoyed watching all the guys doing their content for the Sphere and just hating every second of it and not being able to do it right. That sort of comedy behind the scenes bit, I love. The opening credits, quite a stalled, slow pit stop for Alpine there, wouldn't it? This is obviously a very McLaren, Red Bull heavy episode, and we get a lot of Brazil and how Norris started at the front and Verstappen started at the back because he couldn't set a decent enough lap because there was a red flag, because Stroll or Alonso crashed, can't remember which one it was. Obviously he had a penalty to take as well. One thing I do really enjoy about Drive to Survive is how ominous, how much of a threat they make Max Verstappen and Red Bull look. And it is sort of true to life. The music that they use, the editing, the fact that it is like you can't see anything in this cloudy, rain-soaked, and then that Red Bull just appears through it. It's so good. I loved it. They did a great job of showing how great a drive that was for Max and how actually a little bit in shock McLaren was that this was happening. Then we move to Vegas, and again it is Max winning that championship, and there's a great shot of a TV screen of Max and Red Bull and everybody celebrating, and then Zach Brown just looking at it. Comedy gold. Loved it. And then we move to Abu Dhabi, and we have that three-way battle between McLaren and Ferrari, who are battling for first, Red Bull and Ferrari, who are battling for second, and they do a really good job at hyping Abu Dhabi up and keeping that hype there and telling the story of a 2-hour-long race that was filled with drama in about 15-20 minutes. What would I give this season of Drive to Survive? I'd probably rate it like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 5 out of 10. I just don't think it offers anything extra to what we've mostly seen. There's a few tiny little bits sprinkled in there, but like it does a good job of hitting all the high points. There is a few missed out. I'll come on to that in a second. But like even the big storyline of Lewis Hamilton, it's told through the usual press snippets mixed with a few confessional interviews. But even like the confessional interviews with Total Wolf doesn't tell us anything that we don't already know. Like we don't get anything extra really across any of the episodes. Again, with the Horner affair, we don't really get anything that we don't know. And I understand maybe with that one. Like Drive to Survive doesn't give us any real background about any of these storylines that it tells us. It just sits on the sidelines and observes. Like what would have been really good is watching, say for the Horner situation, seeing how really challenging that period was for Christian Horner. We get basically nothing about it. We get one clip of him being like, I can't wait for the race to be on because it's only 2 hours, I get a piece. Like, there's just no real indication of how grueling that time must have been for Horner. I'm not on his side, but I'm just saying it would have been interesting to see more of him actually dealing with what was happening. And I think that Drive to Survive just really makes sort of light of all of these big things. You could argue that the key stories of the 2024 F1 season are all covered and retold. There is no way to fit absolutely everything in, I have to say, but it does feel like certain plot points were dragged over 2 or 3 episodes when really they could have been condensed and just been told in one. As I said, with Ollie Behrman, there is nothing about his debut in Saudi Arabia, which is what garnered him his seat, I would say, in F1 in 2025. There's nothing about him doing well in Baku. The only thing we get to see is him getting told off because he couldn't keep the car on track when it was literally a slip and slide out there in Brazil. I don't think the show did him any justice whatsoever. There's zero talk about Aston Martin. They're basically not in the show apart from 2 crashes in Brazil, which aren't even talked about properly. It's just to explain that Max Verstappen couldn't set a quali lap in. Also, the Perez episode, there is the sense that Perez is fighting for his life, but it's not fully explored at all. It's all just about Daniel, which I understand was a big moment, him leaving, but there's no backstage moments of Checo Perez really feeling the pressure. There's nothing throughout the 10 episodes that really make you say, wow, that's something, that, wow, I can't believe we're watching this. Do you know what I mean? It's all just very surface level, things we've already seen, with a couple of confessionals talking about things we already know. I think it is probably the most real season we've had in a while. However, I wouldn't say that Netflix was outright lying in a lot of the episodes. I think there is a lot less plot twisting than previous seasons, but they do have a tendency to over-dramatize already fairly dramatic moments. And actually, they over-dramatize some things that just don't mean anything. Listen, we all know that Drive to Survive is not made for the hardcore fans. It is an overdramatic, oversimplified retelling of a season that has just happened. With that being said, it is a perfectly watchable, fun way to pass the time as we wait until the new F1 season begins. And that is everything from us. Speaking of the beginning of the season, we are literally going to be coming off this episode and going straight back to recording because this season starts next week. The first race of the year is next week. This time next week, we'll actually know who the first winner of the season is. But let me know if you did watch Drive to Survive Season 7 and what your thoughts were in the comments down below. We will see you very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Love you. Bye.